Imagine your automobile mechanic worked for years in a dealership for one brand. Let's say maybe Toyota. Scotty Kilmer will tell you Toyota is the best. And is now working in a dealership for your car. Maybe you own a Ford or a Chevy or whatever, a competing brand. What if the mechanic is unwilling to learn? Or what if the mechanic already thought they knew everything, and they could be demonstrated that they didn't? I see this parallel situation with CAD programs all of the time, where somebody gets so hung up on one particular CAD program or another that they don't see the full picture. So I'm going to title this video as You're Not Designing, You're Doodling. So I see the same kind of situation over and over again, where whatever CAD program it is, somebody comes in and says that they're new to a particular program, but they are certified and proficient in some other CAD software. So now they're struggling in the new CAD software. So, when I started out, actually my first 8 years were out on the shop floor as a machinist, running the milling machine, running the lathe, running surface grinders, cylindrical grinders, centerless grinders, close tolerance machining. I would typically get drawings that were, and this was, going back 40 years ago, I would get drawings that were hand drawn and then later on done in AutoCAD. And I would redline those drawings and send them back to engineering for clarification. I would find things like improper conversions between inch and metric unit. I would find designs that obviously didn't match the true design intent. I would find just plain straight out mistakes. I've been redlining drawings for almost 40 years now, back into the last century. And so in my day-to-day work now, I use SolidWorks. Occasionally I'll use AutoCAD, use Inventor, and occasionally I'll use Creo. But the typical situation then is actually, going back to the AutoCAD days when we didn't have a history tree to look at to decipher how the design was done. And nowadays we do. And I'm going to go to the question that came up on the SolidWorks forum. And when they start to analyze this, this poster, Josh Brady, says, you're not designing anything, you're doodling. So I'm going to borrow that and I'm going to use that phrase throughout this video. So we need to really start designing rather than just merely doodling. And so I get this part that was done in SolidWorks, and I start measuring some of the dimensions. And it doesn't matter what CAD program it was designed in. The thing is, it wasn't designed, it was doodled. And we can check this real easily. And so, first I'll go to, this is the flat pattern view. And now, when I look at a flat pattern, I might expect some dimensions that don't seem to make logical sense because of bend allowance that has been calculated. And so I'll just say that let's just delete that dimension because I can't really tell a whole lot from this. This one, let's delete that dimension because I really can't tell a whole lot from that. So this dimension, if I take this out to 8 decimal places, it is 2 inches. But if I take this out to 8 decimal places, I see that it's an oddball number. And the same way with the width of this slot, I see that it doesn't seem to make logical sense. And I really wonder then, I'd like to see the sketch for that. What was the design intent? How was that number arrived at? And one of the things I did is I displayed this then both as inch units and millimeter units, because sometimes it's just a simple matter of conversion from one unit system to another, and that can cause problems. But we see that this dimension doesn't make sense in metric or in inches. And as I go around the part, I find that same situation occurs for almost all of the dimensions on the part. Now, a few dimensions make sense, a half an inch center to center. And if I take that out to 8 decimal places, it is a half an inch. 0.6 on this one, 0.275 for the radius. Those dimensions make logical sense. And I have some others on here, so all of them that make logical sense, that, if I take them out to 8 decimal places, they are measurable. I can set these up on a coordinate measuring machine, and I can, do those measurements, or out on the milling machine, out on the shop floor, with my calipers, or, setting up the machine tool, I can actually make those apart to those dimensions. But for many of these dimensions, they make no logical sense whatsoever. I might round these off. It might look like nice, simple numbers at 1 or 2 decimal places. But if we check them to 8 decimal places, you're left with the... I can't call this thing anything other than a doodle. It isn't a design. It's a doodle. How else would you describe all of these dimensions? Now, these dimensions would be the same on this face that they would be on the flat pattern. So we can't say that was because of the bend allowance calculation, K-factor, bend deduction. However we do that, these dimensions would be the same. And we go around and we find, that there are quite a few dimensions that don't make any sense. About the only dimensions that make sense, logical sense, that we could measure with a coordinate measuring machine or with our calipers, or that we can put into the CNC code, the G code, is the distance between centers of these holes from here to here, from here to here, and no matter how I dimension this slot, either I dimension it as an angle, which that might be an oddball way of dimensioning it, but I dimension between centers, I dimension the distance from, none of the dimensions make sense, make logical sense. They're not measurable. If they're not measurable, they're not manufacturable. This is just art, and I might even call it poorly done art. I try to figure out, so this is 0.2 across here, a precise dimension. This is 2 inches across here, but I try to figure out the location of it, and no matter how I figure out the location, if I put a center line halfway between here and here, and I dimension to that center line, it's not centered. It's close to being centered, real close to being centered, but it looks like it was just done by eyeball. I don't know. The only thing I can call this is doodling.